I beg to move that the committee has considered the draft Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 Amendment Number 2, Order 2024. And it is a real pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning, Mr Efford, especially as this is the first time that I've had the pleasure of addressing this committee after a 14-year break. So I want to start by first of all saying that I'm very grateful to the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, known as the ACMD, for its advice, which has informed this draft order. The draft order was laid before Parliament on the 2nd of September. The purpose of this order is to amend Schedule 2 to the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, the MDA, to control 6 substances and introduce a generic definition of nitazines as Class A drugs and to control 16 substances as Class C drugs. This draft order also seeks to add clarity to the control of an existing Class B drug by adding an additional common name and its International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry name to its entry. If I start with 2-methyl-237 and closely related substances, following the 66th session of the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs, the synthetic opioid 2-methyl-237 was added to Schedule 1 of the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs of 1961, to which the UK is a signatory. New synthetic opioids are a substantial current public health threat. They have similar effects to well-known opioids such as morphine and heroin, although some can be more potent. With a high potential for addiction and dependence, lower doses of these substances can lead to the same effects as other opioids. They have an increased risk of accidental overdose, which can lead to life-threatening outcomes. In its report of the 27th of March 2024, the ACMD considered the harms of 2-methyl-237, but also provided advice on closely related icyl-piperazine opioids. The ACMD noted the likelihood of further increases in their prevalence, as well as the potential health and social harms associated with specific icyl-piperazine opioids. This draft order follows the recommendations from the ACMD and therefore seeks to control 4 named icyl-piperazine opioids and 2 chemically bridged icyl-piperazine derivatives, which includes 2-methyl-237 as Class A drugs under the MDA. Turning now to nitazines, under the MDA, there are a number of nitazines, another type of synthetic opioid, which are already controlled as Class A drugs. However, more needs to be done to reduce the opportunity for criminals to circumvent existing controls by making minor alterations to the chemical structure of existing named nitazines under control. And that is why this draft order implements the ACMD proposal to introduce a generic definition of nitazines. The intention is to future-proof the legislation by covering known and predicted variants likely to present a significant risk to health. The ACMD has published 4 updates to address new structurally related compounds under the definition. As such, the draft order introduces a generic definition for nitazines as a Class A drug under the MDA. Now turning to benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines are sedatives known for use in various treatments, including anxiety, insomnia, and epilepsy. In recent years, we've seen an increase in the non-medical use of novel benzodiazepines. They and related compounds have been associated with significant health harms. Since the ACMD's last report in 2020, further benzodiazepines and related compounds have been identified, which are not controlled under the MDA. As such, the ACMD published new recommendations in March 24. The ACMD recommended 15 compounds for control, none of which are licensed as medicines in the UK, and as such, in line with the ACMD advice, this draft order seeks to control 15 benzodiazepines and related compounds as Class C drugs under the MDA. Moving on to xylazine. Xylazine is a non-opioid tranquilizer which has been approved for use in veterinary medicine. However, we have seen an increase both internationally and in the UK in its illicit use. Xylazine is being used to adulterate illicitly manufactured opioids such as fentanyl to produce a mixture which is known as tranq in the USA. Xylazine can dangerously lower an individual's level of consciousness, especially if combined with other sedatives. So this draft order seeks to control xylazine as a Class C drug under the MDA as recommended by the ACMD. Now turning to methoxyphenidine, this draft order also amends the entry for methoxyphenidine to add an additional common name and its full international standardised name. This does not affect the existing control of the substance as a Class B drug, but adds clarity on exactly which drug is controlled, given that there are multiple common names. So the effect of the order, if made, this order will mean that these substances will be subject to control under the MDA. Furthermore, enforcement agencies such as the police will have the appropriate powers to further restrict the supply and use of these substances. Now, while nearly all these substances are likely to be captured by the Psychoactive Substances Act 2016, the control of these substances under the MDA will enable higher penalties for their supply, as well as introducing a possession offence with wider reach. And those who supply or produce a Class A drug could face up to life imprisonment, an unlimited fine, or both. For a Class C, this could be up to 14 years imprisonment, an unlimited fine, or both. Those found in unlawful possession face up to 7 years in prison for a Class A and up to 2 for a Class C, with an unlimited fine on both. In addition to this order, a further statutory instrument will be introduced via the negative resolution procedure. This is to make various amendments to the Misuse of Drugs Regulations 2001, known as the MDR, and if necessary, the Misuse of Drugs Designation Order 2015, to schedule and designate the newly controlled drugs as appropriate. This follows the ACMD advice and will ensure that they will only be available for research or other special purposes under a Home Office licence. As xylazine has legitimate use as a veterinary medicine, it will be placed in Schedule 4, Part 1 of the MDR to enable its continued legitimate use. And it is the Government's intention that these amendments will come into force on the same date as this affirmative order in early next year. The ACMD has provided very helpful, independent and detailed advice on the harms associated with these substances. We have a responsibility to protect the public against dangerous substances and will continue to act as swiftly as we can to ensure appropriate controls are in place. And I hope that members will agree with this draft order and support the Government's position to ensure that all 22 substances, as well as those caught by the generic definition, the nitazines, be subject to strict controls, and I therefore commend this order to the committee.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, Amendment number 2, Order 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Efford. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'm thankful to the Minister for her comments and statements. I'd also like to thank the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs and its chair, Professor Owen Bowden-Jones, for their continued work in providing advice to the Government on this critical area of focus. The previous Government accepted all 5 recommendations set out in the ACMD's March 2024 report in May this year, and I welcome the new Government's continued commitment to accept the recommendations set out in the report. The measures set out in the order will build upon the previous Government's work to mitigate the very real threat of synthetic opioids across the UK, after previously banning 15 new synthetic opioid drugs. The conclusions of the Advisory Council's March 2024 report made clear the substantial risk that the Taliban's ban on growing opium poppy for heroin production in Afghanistan may result in an increase in the appearance of new synthetic opioids. The March report adds that specifically listing currently identified compounds for control is the simpler approach, but risks being overtaken in the future by the development of further variants. The House of Lords Secondary Legislation Committee noted that the Home Office would need to remain agile in amending the definition to capture new variants. So I'd ask the Minister what steps they are taking to ensure that the Government remains vigilant to ensure any variants beyond the scope of this amendment are spotted and further amendments are made accordingly. And is the Minister confident that the Department and the ACMD are equipped to act in a timely manner to make further necessary amendments? Of course, there are also other drugs affected by this order, and I'd like to pay attention to xylazine, also known as tranq, which is increasingly being used with opioids and involved in overdose deaths in the United States and seen as an emerging threat. The previous government welcomed and accepted the recommendations of the ACMD, and I welcome the incumbent government in continuing to categorise xylazine as a Class C drug. To that end, can the Minister also provide reassurance that the Department will robustly monitor the impact of categorising xylazine as a Class C drug and take any further precautions accordingly to ensure that the government does its duty in reducing the tragic number of drug-associated deaths? And lastly, what reflection does she have of the ability to sentence drugs misuse in the context of the government's decision to release low-level offenders early? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful to the comments of the Shadow Minister, and particularly his reference to the situation in Afghanistan, and we need to be very mindful of that. In terms of the particular questions he asked, I think it's absolutely right that we remain vigilant, and I'm confident that the ACMD has the resources to do that. They have the power to look at whatever they need to look at in terms of new variants coming into circulation. So I think that that's really important, and I think that the purpose of today is very much about a belt and braces approach to making sure that we're ahead of the game wherever we can be, and I am confident that the ACMD will allow us to do that, and we may well be back here in the future if they provide further advice. On xylazine, I take the point around keeping an eye on how that works, because we know, as I said in my opening remarks, that it is a medicine that's used within veterinary science, and we need to make sure that that's being used in the same way, and there's no problems with that. But then if it also is being used in different ways, we need to be mindful of that. So absolutely, we remain vigilant. This is an area that I'm particularly interested in, and I will continue to bring my looking at things as often as I can. I think we all agree that these are dangerous substances with potential to cause significant harm to individuals and to society. Sorry, the other point I just wanted to mention, that because he referred to how putting this order forward could have issues around law enforcement and the prisons and all of that. And I think it's worth just referring to the impact assessment and the economic note that's been produced. Clearly the law enforcement response is expected to be reasonably managed within existing resources, and that's set out within the impact assessment. And that's due to the relatively low levels of detection of these substances compared to other controlled substances, and the likelihood that such drugs are often possessed and trafficked with other substances already controlled under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971. Now, the police and other law enforcement agencies are operationally independent, as the Shadow Minister knows, but we do expect them to prioritise resources between tackling crime, including drug-related crime, with a focus on those offences that cause the most harm. So with those comments in relation to the questions posed, I would just like to again say it's right that all the substances that we've been discussing today are put under strict controls under the 1971 Act, and with that I commend this order to the committee.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, Amendment number 2, Order 2024. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order.